Welcome, everybody, and a great welcome to Joe. Thank you so much for making it all the way down to us to Krakow. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you today. We have an amazing task. In 15 minutes, we have to go and talk about future of the word. I know that you laughed already about this. So let's just kick off. You have, a year and a half ago, started working on a board for Eurasian Group Foundation that is doing an amazing job into trying to help people to understand and make sense how they need to prepare for a transition. And one of the topics you really focus on is social media. And I guess let's start with social media. A growing body of research has recently shown that usage of social media increases violence online. We have seen what has happened recently, unfortunately, with terrorist attack in Christchurch in New Zealand and also in Sri Lanka. We know that Sri Lankan government has shut down a lot of social media networks, being afraid that those actions might spread more hate. So, Joe, is it really about social media platforms, or there's a more deeply rooted problem there? And can you tell the audience a little bit of what you're doing currently with New Zealand government and the French government to really tackle this issue?
That's a good question. One of the ways to think about it is if we didn't have Facebook and we didn't have Instagram and we didn't have YouTube, would we still have terrorist attacks? And I think everybody would agree that we do. I got called a couple of weeks ago by a very dear friend of mine right after Christchurch, who had been the ambassador, the economic ambassador from New Zealand to America. And Jacinda Ardern, the Right Honorable, had sent him up to come to Silicon Valley because her goal, they understand free speech and that free speech triumphs. So the question is, how can we ameliorate, how can we keep it from being such an easy source? And it's not an easy problem. I got kind of put in my place last week. I was in my home in Napa Valley, and I spent the morning with my friend Kevin Systrom, who founded Instagram. And, he's technical, and I asked him all the questions, and he said, Joe, you're working on the wrong problem. He said, Facebook and social media is a symptom. The problem is hate. The problem is mental illness. Why don't we put a lot of resources to working on the problem, and working on the symptoms is not going to solve it. I had dinner with the Right Honorable Jacinda Ardern last week in Paris, and my word of caution was, you drive these people off one network. There's just 100 other ways on the internet to spring back up again. So be careful what you wish for. The law of unintended consequences here will get you every time.
Yeah, so that brings us nicely to hate speech, which is actually, top of the agenda for a lot of people these days. We know the European officials are putting more and more pressure on large companies to actually monitor and prevent the spread of hate speech. We know this regulations from Germany from last year that impose large companies to quickly track and remove this hate speech as soon as possible within the 24 hours. And if they don't, they will face a huge fines up to 50 million euro. I know you have a strong opinion about this. So are the penalties the way to go forward?
Well, everybody will look at this one differently. I come from a country where free speech is sort of at the top of our rights. And for those of you that don't know the American history, Patrick Henry said something to the effect of, I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And we've got to keep that in mind, because as soon as you start regulating speech, who gets to be the arbiter? So when I come from a place where there's free speech, and by the way, New Zealand does too. So Ardern's real concern was, how do we solve this problem without giving up free speech? whether we like what people say or not, before the internet, there was a lot of hate speech. And some of it got picked up, some of it didn't. I don't like the fact that it's there, but I like less the fact that somebody is going to tell me what I can or can't say.
Yeah. But we talked a little bit about this, and you said that the social media networks, including Mark and Facebook, are willing to take more guidelines on this. Critics, those are saying it's too late, too little. What do you think can be done for really move forward with that subject?
Well, I actually think, speaking to a lot of startups, because I've spent my last 30 years with them, this is an unmet need. How we manage this kind of thing, and particularly video. People are saying too easily, well, we ought to do what TV does, and we ought to push the delay button for 5 seconds to get rid, so we can monitor it. But you've got to keep in mind, on television, they're monitoring one station. We're close to having 3 billion people online every day. Who's going to monitor that? I actually think it is a difficult problem, but it is a solvable problem, particularly with the new artificial intelligence technologies coming. And I'd like to challenge the audience, as I have almost everywhere I've gone recently, figure out how you might contribute to the technical solution.
So that actually brings us nicely to next subject, which is privacy and security. We know again that you have your point of view on this. Privacy is a human right, and we need a GDPR for the world. Those are the famous words from Satya Nadella and Microsoft CEO. Do we actually really have a privacy? Do we have a right to have privacy?
We don't, and we probably won't. I've spent my entire life, now 50 years, in Palo Alto in Silicon Valley. And I remember back in the early 90s when Sun microcomputer, does anybody remember Sun? Raise your hand.
Yeah, a few people in the audience do.
Well, good. Because I said that a few years ago at Berkeley about DEC, digital equipment, and there wasn't a single hand that went up. Yeah. And they were the number 2 computer company for a long, long time. Scott McNealy said one time, when the internet was just getting started and probably 80% of the servers were Sun, he said, if you want privacy, get over it. And I'll tell you a story. I probably shouldn't name the company, but a company that you all know very well, the CEO invited me to dinner, and he wanted me to meet with his board, and he wanted me to talk about the impact of the internet on the world. Now, since we had done the first ever venture-backed internet deal, UUNet, back probably in '92, I've been kind of following it pretty closely. So I said to the CEO, I said, all right, I'll do it, but on one condition. Give me the name of each of your board members and allow me to go online and find out one thing online that they will be embarrassed if I say it to them in front of the whole board. Yeah. And he said he thought that was a great idea. So I spent not that much time researching. And I started off with one of the guys. I said, hey, Bob, I see that you were fined $10,000 because you built an addition to your house without getting a permit. And the whole board looks at him, and he looks at me, and I said, here's the URL where you can go to and read the story. And then I said, Sam, I see you gave $2,500 to the Republican Party, and you got a fine. And I just went through, and I found one thing. Public databases just had to know a little bit more about where to search. And I think if everybody in this room knew everything about you that you might not feel comfortable talking about that was obtainable, we'd kind of stop the conversation about privacy pretty quickly.
Yeah, so you're right in a way, but we still kind of want personal privacy. So do you think there are boundaries to make? I'm sure that you wouldn't like any stranger to walk into your house and feel like he's at home. So we feel that right to personal privacy should be there. So what about the digital privacy?
Well, I have to admit, I got a little upset when I found out Alexa was listening to me. Even though I don't use Alexa, I do use the Apple equivalent, and I hope they're not doing that. But one thing you need to keep in mind when privacy, how many times do you think your picture was taken since you arrived at the airport yesterday or in any city? They tell me now that if I fly into London, which I did on Saturday afternoon, from the time I got off the plane until I got to my hotel, there were 200 pictures of me taken and stored on some computer somewhere. Yeah. Now, is that privacy?
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. I know that you get a lot of questions about traveling around the world. What are the next disruptive trends, and where do you see a next Facebook coming from? So what would you say, what's top of mind?
One of my favorite subjects, and one of the problems that I've got two daughters. One's at Silicon Valley. I call her a startup queen. She's on her second artificial intelligence startup. One of the problems that that generation is going to face is probably the greatest economic disruption in history as we move pretty much completely out of the industrial economy and move pretty fully into what I call the intelligent economy. And there's going to be significant job disruption. Now, yes, a lot of jobs are going to go away, but boy, there are going to be a lot of jobs created, and I can't even tell you what they are, but every time we have new technology, it happens. The key thing we've got to do as a society is reinvent from day one education. Let me give you an example. If I have my Apple Watch on, what would happen if I had this in the first grade and I was allowed to use it for test? Hey Siri, how much is 2 plus 2? No, you're not listening. Oh, I turned my phone off.
Oh, yeah. So, but yeah, we know she would say it's 4.
But my point is,
yeah.
I've asked people a question. If you think through your elementary education, first 12 years, can you think of a question that you were asked on a test that Siri didn't know the answer to? And so you spent 12 years in school learning maybe, 0.01% of what you could find out on your watch? And the focus on the education was the what, not the so what. I think one of the killer apps that I have been searching for, not here yet, but will be, is what I call your personal lifetime teacher. And this is a device that you can start to interact with from the very moment you can start to speak. And this device knows you based on the first time you say mama or daddy, and is with you your whole life and can teach you at your rate in a way that you like to learn, and it's available 24/7 to help you. It is your personal, exclusive teacher. Now, that goal is not going to happen this year or next year, but it's the direction that I think we're going to move as we really have to repurpose an entire society.
Yeah, so I said to you in the beginning that it's an impossible task because we have a very short time. So thank you, Joe, for coming, talking to us. You're a great thought leader. And then if you like, ladies and gentlemen, you might find Joe later in the conference. And if you have any questions you would like to ask him, it's chance once in a million, because I know you travel hell a lot, and you should off to Silicon Valley after. So thank you so much, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. Take care.
Let's give it up for Kate and Joe. Thank you guys so much.